Florence Hart vanished from London society 2 years ago without explanation, leaving behind whispers and speculation. The daughter of a respected earl, she had been courted by one of the most powerful dukes in England, until he abandoned her without a single word. Now she has returned, poised and unreadable, her heart carefully guarded. But on a spring evening in 1898, at the season's most anticipated ball, their eyes meet across a crowded ballroom. The Duke stands frozen, realizing what he lost. She turns away, determined never to be that heartbroken girl again. Yet fate has other plans, and the truth buried between them is far more dangerous than either imagined. The chandeliers of Marlborough House blazed with 1,000 candles, casting golden light across the polished marble floors where London's elite gathered for the opening ball of the 1898 spring season. Florence Hart stood at the entrance, her gloved hand resting on her father's arm, and felt the weight of every gaze that turned toward her. She had prepared for this moment. The pale blue silk of her gown whispered against her skin with each breath. Her dark hair was arranged in an elegant coiffure, simple but impeccable. She looked like what she was, the daughter of Lord Samuel Hart, Earl of Ashford, a woman of breeding and composure. What she did not look like was the broken girl who had fled this world 2 years ago. "My dear Florence, how wonderful to see you return to us," Miss Eleanor Pembroke gushed, her fan fluttering with barely concealed curiosity. Florence smiled, the expression practiced until it reached her eyes with convincing warmth. "You are too kind, Miss Pembroke. I have been enjoying the quiet of the country, but London has its charms." As they moved through the crowd, Florence caught fragments of whispered conversation that followed in their wake. "That is Lord Hart's eldest daughter, is it not? The one who disappeared so suddenly. She looks remarkably composed. One would never guess she had been so devastated." Florence kept her spine straight and her expression serene. Let them talk. She had learned that the greatest power lay not in controlling what others said, but in controlling how much their words affected you. Her sister Helen appeared at her elbow, 17 and luminous with youth. Helen squeezed Florence's hand briefly, a gesture of solidarity that steadied her. The orchestra began the opening waltz. Florence accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, taking a small sip as she surveyed the room with detached interest. That was when she saw him. Oscar Whitmore, Duke of Ravenshire, stood near the far windows, his tall frame silhouetted against the night beyond. He wore black evening clothes that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as though he had run his hand through it moments before, a habit she remembered too well. He was not alone. On his arm, resplendent in deep crimson silk, was Evelyn Hale, the widowed Duchess of Somerton. She was perhaps 30, with the kind of beauty that came from perfect bone structure and absolute confidence. Her hand rested possessively on Oscar's forearm as she leaned close to whisper something in his ear. Florence's champagne glass trembled. She set it down with deliberate care. "Are you well?" Helen asked quietly. "Perfectly well," Florence replied, proud that her voice did not waver. "Miss Hart," a warm voice said beside her, "may I have the honor of this dance?" Florence turned to find Jonathan Ward bowing before her. He was 27, with kind brown eyes and an earnest expression. They had met 6 months ago at a house party in Bath, and he had been unfailingly courteous, never pressing her with questions about her past. "Mr. Ward," she said with genuine pleasure, "I would be delighted." His hand was steady as he led her onto the dance floor. The music swelled around them, a Strauss waltz that lifted the spirits of everyone in the room. "You look lovely this evening, Miss Hart," he said, as they turned in time with the music. "You are very kind, sir. I mean it sincerely. There is something different about you tonight, a certain strength, if I may be so bold as to observe." Florence met his eyes and saw only honest admiration there. "Perhaps I have learned that strength is sometimes the only choice we have." They danced in comfortable silence, and Florence felt herself beginning to relax. This was what she wanted: a pleasant evening, a kind partner, a life uncomplicated by the sort of passion that left one shattered. Then the music seemed to fade. It happened gradually, like the volume being turned down. The voices around her became muffled, the glitter of the chandeliers dulled. Florence felt her body continue to move through the steps of the waltz, but her awareness had narrowed to a single point. She looked up and found Oscar Whitmore staring at her from across the ballroom. The distance between them might have been 20 feet or 20 miles. Everyone else seemed to blur at the edges of her vision. There was only him, and the expression on his face that she could not quite read. Shock, certainly. His eyes had widened slightly, his lips parted as though he might call out to her. But there was something else beneath the surprise, something that looked almost like pain. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Florence forgot how to breathe. She forgot that she was supposed to be over him, past this, healed. All she could remember was the last time she had seen him, 2 years ago in her father's garden, when he had told her with cold formality that he had made a mistake, that whatever was between them could not continue, that she should forget him. She had asked why. She had begged for an explanation. She had stood there with tears streaming down her face, demanding that he at least give her the courtesy of the truth. He had simply walked away. Now, across the crowded ballroom, with hundreds of people between them and 2 years of silence stretching like an abyss, Oscar Whitmore looked at her as though she were the only person in the world. Florence felt something inside her chest crack, just slightly. A hairline fracture in the armor she had so carefully constructed. Then she remembered who she was now, what she had become. She turned her face away and smiled at Jonathan Ward, engaging him in conversation about his recent trip to Edinburgh. She became once again the poised and pleasant Miss Florence Hart, but she could feel Oscar's gaze like a brand against her skin. The dance ended, and Jonathan escorted her back to where her father stood in conversation with several gentlemen. Florence accepted another glass of champagne and forced herself to focus on the discussion of the upcoming polo season. The evening wore on. Florence danced with other partners, made polite conversation, smiled at all the right moments, and through it all she felt him watching her. It was past midnight when Florence finally excused herself, claiming she needed air. Helen offered to accompany her, but Florence gently declined. She needed a moment alone, away from the suffocating press of bodies and expectations. The corridor leading to the terrace was blessedly cool and quiet. Florence pressed one hand against the wall, taking deep breaths and willing her racing heart to slow. "You are stronger than this," she told herself fiercely. "You survived his leaving. You will survive his looking." She pushed open the French doors and stepped onto the stone terrace overlooking the garden. The night air was cool against her heated skin. Below, the garden paths were illuminated by lanterns hung in the trees, casting dancing shadows across the carefully manicured hedges. Florence walked to the balustrade and gripped it with both hands, grateful for the solidity of the stone beneath her palms. Behind her, the sounds of the ball continued, music and laughter and the clink of crystal glasses. But out here, in the relative darkness, she could finally let her mask slip. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at them as though they belonged to someone else, these treacherous hands that refused to remain steady. 2 years. It had been 2 years of rebuilding herself piece by careful piece. 2 years of learning to sleep through the night without dreaming of him. 2 years of teaching herself that she did not need answers to move forward. And one look across a ballroom had nearly undone all of it. Florence closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the stars. Somewhere in the house, a clock began to chime one. The ball would continue for hours yet, but she knew she could not go back inside. She would make her excuses to her father, claim a headache, and... "Florence." The voice came from behind her, low and rough with emotion. She froze. Her entire body went rigid, every muscle locking in place. Because she knew that voice. She knew the way he shaped her name, the slight deepening of his tone on the second syllable. She had heard him say her name 1,000 different ways, with laughter, with tenderness, with desire. She had never heard him say it like this, with such raw need. Slowly, Florence turned to face Oscar Whitmore, Duke of Ravenshire, the man who had broken her heart and walked away without looking back. He stood in the doorway to the terrace, his hand still on the door handle. The light from the ballroom behind him cast his face partly in shadow, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell with unsteady breaths. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Oscar took a step forward, and Florence felt the world shift beneath her feet once more. Oscar stood in the doorway, backlit by the golden glow of the ballroom, and Florence felt every carefully constructed defense threaten to crumble. 2 years. 2 years of silence, and now he stood before her as though he had any right to speak her name with such desperate familiarity. "Your Grace," she said, her voice cool and formal, a stark contrast to the way he had spoken to her. The title felt like a weapon between them. Something flickered across his face, pain perhaps, or regret. He took another step onto the terrace, closing the door softly behind him. The sounds of the ball became muffled, leaving only the rustle of leaves in the garden below and the pounding of Florence's own heartbeat. "I did not expect to see you here tonight," he said, his voice rough. "You look well." Florence lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of pride her mother had instilled in her. "As do you, Your Grace, though I confess I am surprised you noticed me at all. You seemed quite occupied with the Duchess of Somerton." The barb landed. She saw him flinch, saw his jaw tighten. "Evelyn is... The situation is not what it appears." "Is it not?" Florence asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Because it appears that you have moved on quite successfully. I congratulate you on your excellent taste. The Duchess is indeed a striking woman." "Florence, please." "I need to explain—" "You need nothing of the sort," she interrupted, her composure fracturing just slightly. "You made yourself perfectly clear 2 years ago when you walked away without so much as a backward glance. What could you possibly have to explain now?" Oscar ran a hand through his hair, the gesture so achingly familiar that Florence had to look away. "Everything," he said simply. "I need to explain everything." "Then you are 2 years too late, Your Grace." Before he could respond, the terrace door opened again. Florence's heart sank as she recognized the deep crimson of Evelyn Hale's gown. The Duchess of Somerton stepped onto the terrace with the grace of a woman who knew she commanded every room she entered. Her dark eyes moved from Oscar to Florence and back again, missing nothing. "Oscar, darling, there you are," Evelyn said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "I have been looking everywhere for you. Lord Pemberton wishes to discuss the railway investments." She moved to his side, her hand sliding possessively along his arm. Florence watched, her stomach churning, as Evelyn looked up at Oscar with an expression of intimate familiarity. "I apologize for interrupting your conversation," Evelyn continued, turning to Florence with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Miss Hart, is it not? How lovely to see you return to society. We had all wondered what became of you." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Florence met the Duchess's gaze without flinching. "I have been in the country with my family, Your Grace. Sometimes one finds that peace and perspective are more valuable than the constant whirl of London society." "How very wise," Evelyn murmured. "Though I confess I could never abandon the season for so long. There is simply too much of interest happening, too many opportunities one might miss." Her fingers tightened on Oscar's arm, making her meaning abundantly clear. Oscar looked between the two women, his expression caught somewhere between frustration and desperation. "Miss Hart and I were merely reminiscing," Florence finished smoothly. "About mutual acquaintances. Nothing more. In fact, I was just about to return to the ballroom. My father will be wondering where I have gone." She moved toward the door, intending to sweep past them both with her dignity intact. But as she drew level with Oscar, he spoke in a voice meant only for her. "Hyde Park. Tomorrow morning. Please." Florence paused for the briefest moment. She did not look at him, did not acknowledge the plea in his voice. Then she continued through the door and back into the glittering chaos of the ball. Her hands were shaking again. Helen found her almost immediately, her young face creased with concern. "What happened? You look pale." "Nothing happened," Florence lied. "I simply needed air." "Where is father?" "Speaking with Lord Ashford about horses." "Florence, the Duke followed you outside. Everyone noticed. Of course they did." Florence closed her eyes briefly, gathering her composure. "Then let them notice. Let them whisper. I have done nothing wrong." But her sister's words stayed with her for the rest of the evening. As she danced and smiled and made pleasant conversation, she could feel the weight of curious stares, the speculation in every whispered exchange. The Duke of Ravenshire and Miss Hart on the terrace together? But what of the Duchess of Somerton? They have been inseparable for months. Poor Miss Hart. First abandoned, now caught in the middle of a scandal. Florence kept her head high and her smile fixed, but by the time their carriage pulled away from Marlborough House in the early hours of the morning, she felt exhausted to her bones. In the darkness of the carriage, Lord Samuel Hart studied his eldest daughter with shrewd eyes. "The Duke of Ravenshire approached you tonight." It was not a question. Florence should have known her father would have been watching. "He did," she confirmed quietly. And he wished to speak with me. I did not give him the opportunity." Her father was silent for a moment. "Then I trust your judgment, Florence, but I would remind you that a man who abandons a woman once may well do so again." "I know, father." She looked out the window at the darkened streets of London passing by. "I know." But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the shadows on her ceiling, she could not stop hearing Oscar's voice. Hyde Park. Tomorrow morning. Please. She should ignore the invitation. She should pretend she had not heard it. She should protect herself from whatever false hope might be kindled by seeing him again. And yet there had been something in his eyes on that terrace, something that looked like genuine anguish, something that suggested there might be more to his abandonment than she had understood. Florence turned onto her side, pulling the covers up to her chin. She would not go. She would not give him the satisfaction of knowing she still cared enough to seek answers. But even as she told herself this, she knew it was a lie, because the truth was simpler and more painful than any justification she could construct. She needed to know why. Even after 2 years, even after all the work she had done to rebuild herself, she needed to understand what had happened between them. She needed to know if there had ever been any truth in the love she thought they had shared. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Florence stood before her wardrobe, trying to convince herself that she was not choosing her walking dress with particular care. The deep green fabric complemented her complexion. The fitted jacket emphasized her figure without being immodest. The matching bonnet with its subtle trim was elegant without being ostentatious. She was not dressing for Oscar Whitmore. She was simply taking a morning walk, as she often did. If she happened to choose the path that led past the Serpentine, well, that was merely coincidence. Helen appeared in her doorway, already dressed for the day. "Are you going walking?" "I thought I might," Florence replied, adjusting her gloves with more attention than necessary. Her sister studied her for a long moment. "Will you be walking alone?" Florence met her eyes in the mirror. "I may encounter acquaintances in the park. One often does during the fashionable hours." "He will be there," Helen said softly. "Won't he?" Florence turned to face her sister. "I do not know what you mean." But Helen was 17 and far more perceptive than Florence gave her credit for. "Be careful," she said simply. "I could not bear to see you hurt again." Florence crossed the room and took her sister's hands in hers. "I am not the same girl I was 2 years ago. I will not be hurt so easily now." Even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. The morning air was crisp as Florence made her way through Hyde Park. The fashionable set would not appear for another hour at least, leaving the paths relatively quiet. A few nurses walked with young children. An elderly gentleman threw bread to the ducks by the Serpentine. A couple strolled arm in arm in the distance. And there, standing beneath an oak tree with his hands clasped behind his back, was Oscar Whitmore. He had not seen her yet. For a moment, Florence simply watched him, this man who had once meant everything to her. He looked tired, she realized. There were lines around his eyes that had not been there 2 years ago, a tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. Then he turned, and his eyes found hers across the grass. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Oscar began to walk toward her slowly, as though afraid she might flee if he moved too quickly. Florence stood her ground, chin lifted, heart racing. When he reached her, he stopped at a respectful distance. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming. I was not certain you would." Florence looked at him steadily. "I am not certain I should have, but I find I am curious, Your Grace. What could you possibly have to say after 2 years of perfect silence?" Oscar's hands clenched at his sides. "Everything," he said again. "If you will allow me, I will tell you everything." The morning after the ball, Florence stood by the drawing-room window, watching rain streak down the glass. Sleep had eluded her most of the night, her mind replaying the encounter on the terrace with Oscar and the cold elegance of the Duchess of Somerton. "Miss Florence," the butler announced from the doorway, "a package has arrived for you." Florence turned to find him holding a brown paper parcel tied with simple twine. Her heart quickened as she took it from him, recognizing the handwriting on the label. Inside, she discovered a book, a collection of contemporary English and American poetry. It was exactly the sort of volume they had once discussed for hours, debating the merits of various poets and reading favorite passages aloud to each other. Between the pages, marking a poem about second chances, was a pressed white rose, carefully preserved. Beneath it, a note in Oscar's familiar hand. "Words feel inadequate for the harm I have caused you, but if there is any chance that you might someday forgive me, I will spend every day earning that forgiveness. I wronged you terribly, and I know it. The past cannot be changed, but perhaps the future might still hold hope." Florence sank into a chair, the book trembling in her hands. Memories flooded back, lazy afternoons in her father's library, Oscar's voice as he read poetry to her, the way his eyes lit up when she challenged his interpretations. She had loved him so completely, and he had destroyed that love with a single, incomprehensible act. The doorbell chimed again. Florence quickly tucked the book and note into a drawer as the butler reappeared. "Mr. Jonathan Ward has called, miss." "Shall I show him in?" Florence smoothed her skirts, composing herself. "Yes, please do." Jonathan entered moments later, his kind face breaking into a warm smile when he saw her. "Miss Hart, I hope I am not intruding. I wanted to inquire after your well-being. You left the ball rather suddenly last evening." Florence gestured for him to sit. "I am well, Mr. Ward. I simply found myself overwhelmed by the crowd. They spoke of trivial matters, the weather, mutual acquaintances, an upcoming charity auction. But then Jonathan grew more serious, leaning forward slightly. "Miss Hart, I have come to value our friendship greatly over these past months. You are a remarkable woman, intelligent, resilient, possessed of a quiet strength that I find truly admirable." Florence felt her stomach tighten. She knew what was coming. "I am not a man given to grand romantic gestures," Jonathan continued, "but I am a man who knows his own heart. I would very much like to pursue a formal courtship with you, if you would permit it." He held up a hand before she could speak. "I ask only that you consider it. I know your heart has been wounded. I would never presume to rush you, but I wanted you to know that I am here, and I am sincere in my regard for you." Florence looked at this good, decent man who offered her safety and stability and genuine affection. It would be so easy to say yes, so easy to choose the path that held no risk of heartbreak. But the book of poetry hidden in her drawer seemed to pulse with unspoken possibilities. "Mr. Ward, you honor me with your offer," she said carefully. "You have been a true friend to me, and I value that friendship immensely. But I must be honest with you. I am not certain what my heart is capable of offering at this time." Jonathan nodded, his expression understanding. "I appreciate your honesty, Miss Hart, and I want you to know that whatever you decide, my friendship remains constant. You need never fear losing that." After he left, Florence sat alone in the drawing room, her mind in turmoil. Two men, two very different paths. One offered safety, the other uncertainty, mixed with the ghost of old passion. That evening, her father summoned her to his study. Lord Samuel Hart was a man of few words, but those he spoke carried weight. "The Duke of Ravenshire called upon me this afternoon," he said without preamble. "He requested formal permission to court you. He spoke of a painful misunderstanding from the past, of circumstances that prevented him from behaving honorably." Florence's heart began to race. "And what did you tell him, father?" "I told him I would consider his request after speaking with you." Her father studied her with shrewd eyes. "Florence, you are a grown woman capable of making your own decisions, but as your father, I must counsel caution." He rose from his desk and came to stand beside her. "Jonathan Ward is a good man, steady, reliable, honest. The Duke of Ravenshire abandoned you once without explanation. What guarantee do we have that he will not do so again? A man who leaves once may well leave twice." "He says there were reasons," Florence said quietly. "Dangerous circumstances that he believed put me at risk." "Perhaps," her father acknowledged. "Or perhaps that is simply what he wishes you to believe now that he has seen you again and realized what he lost." You must decide whether you can trust a man who chose to hurt you rather than trust you with the truth." Florence looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "What would you have me do, Father?" Lord Samuel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I would have you choose carefully, my dear. I would have you protect your heart, but ultimately the choice must be yours. I will support whatever decision you make." After dinner, Helen found Florence in the music room, staring at the pianoforte without playing. "You have been quiet all evening," her sister observed, settling onto the bench beside her. "Does this have anything to do with the Duke?" Florence sighed. "He sent me a book of poetry, the kind we used to read together." Helen's eyes widened. "And Mr. Ward proposed a formal courtship this afternoon." "Oh, Florence." Helen took her hand. "What will you do?" "I do not know," Florence admitted. "Part of me wants to choose safety. Jonathan is kind and steady. He would never hurt me the way Oscar did. But my heart does not race when I see him. My breath does not catch. There is no fire, Helen, only warmth. And I cannot decide if that is enough." Helen squeezed her hand. "Perhaps you need to hear what the Duke has to say. Truly hear him. Before you can make any decision, you need to understand why he left." Florence looked at her sister with surprise. "I thought you would tell me to choose Jonathan, to protect myself." "I want you to be happy," Helen said simply. "And I do not think you can be truly happy until you have answers. Even if those answers lead you away from the Duke, at least you will know." That night, Florence stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the gas lamps illuminating the street below. In the space of a single day, everything had shifted. The man she thought she had buried in her past had returned with gifts and apologies. A good man offered her a future free from pain, and her own heart remained stubbornly, impossibly uncertain. The book of poetry sat on her bedside table, the pressed white rose marking the page about second chances and forgiveness. Florence picked up the book and read the marked poem again. It spoke of lovers separated by misunderstanding, of wounds that time could heal if both parties were willing to try. She thought of Oscar's face on the terrace, the genuine anguish in his eyes when he had asked her to listen. She thought of Jonathan's steady kindness, his patient offer of courtship with no pressure. And she thought of her father's words, "A man who leaves once may leave twice." But what if there had been a reason? What if the truth was more complicated than simple abandonment? Florence closed the book and set it down. She would need to know everything before she could move forward. And that meant giving Oscar the chance to explain fully, no matter how painful the conversation might be. Tomorrow she would send him a message. She would agree to hear his full story, to see whatever proof he claimed to have. And then, only then, could she decide which path to take. Florence did not sleep well that night, but when morning came, she knew what she had to do. 2 days later, Florence found herself once again walking through Hyde Park. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that made London seem almost beautiful. She had sent Oscar a brief note agreeing to hear his full explanation, and he had responded with a time and place. The ornamental lake glittered in the sunlight as she approached. Oscar stood waiting near a secluded bench, dressed simply in a dark coat and no hat. When he saw her, relief flooded his features. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly as she drew near. "I was not certain you would." "I nearly did not," Florence replied honestly. "But I find I cannot move forward without understanding the past." They sat on the bench, maintaining a proper distance between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Oscar began, his voice low and measured. "My father died 3 years ago. It was ruled an accident, a fall from his horse during a morning ride. But 6 months before his death, he had confronted a business associate named Leonard Hale about irregularities in a railway investment they shared." Florence listened intently as Oscar continued. "Leonard is the uncle of Duchess Evelyn. He is a powerful man with connections throughout London's financial circles. When my father threatened to expose the fraud, Leonard made veiled threats. 3 weeks later, my father's saddle girth was found to have been deliberately weakened." Florence's hand went to her throat. "You believe he was murdered?" Oscar nodded grimly. "I have spent the past 2 years gathering evidence, letters, financial records, testimony from witnesses who were initially too frightened to speak. But the investigation made me a target. My carriage was forced off the road. My coachman was badly injured. I received anonymous warnings that anyone close to me could be used as leverage. He turned to face her fully, and Florence saw the shadows of sleepless nights in his eyes. You were the person I loved most in the world, Florence. When those threats came, all I could think was that I had put you in danger simply by caring for you. I was terrified that Leonard would use you to control me, or worse, harm you to punish me. So you chose to break my heart instead, Florence said quietly. I chose to make you hate me, Oscar corrected. I thought if I ended things cruelly, if I convinced you I had never truly cared, then you would be irrelevant to Leonard's schemes. You would be safe, and it never occurred to you that I might have wanted a choice in the matter, that I might have been willing to face danger at your side, rather than be cast aside like a child who could not handle the truth. Oscar's jaw tightened. Every day I questioned my decision. Every day I wanted to run to you and beg forgiveness, but I had already lost my father. The thought of being responsible for harm coming to you was unbearable. Florence stood and walked to the edge of the lake, her back to him. The water rippled gently in the breeze, reflecting clouds and sky. She felt the weight of his explanations settling over her like a heavy cloak. You took away my agency, she said finally. You made a decision that affected both our lives without giving me any say. Do you understand how that feels? To be treated as though my own safety and happiness were not mine to determine. I do now, Oscar said, rising and moving to stand a few feet behind her. I have had 2 years to understand the depth of my mistake. I hurt you in trying to protect you, and that was unforgivable. Florence turned to face him. And the Duchess of Somerton. The entire ballroom believes you are courting her. I needed access to the Hale family to gather final pieces of evidence, Oscar explained. Evelyn believes we have an understanding, but I have made her no promises. My only interest in her is what she can reveal about her uncle's activities. How convenient for you, Florence said bitterly. And when your investigation is complete? What then? Will you simply cast her aside as you did me? It is not the same, Oscar insisted. What was between you and me was real. My feelings for Evelyn are entirely fabricated. Florence studied his face, searching for signs of deception and finding only earnest desperation. Part of her wanted to believe him. Part of her wanted to throw caution aside and trust that the love they had shared had been genuine. But another part, the part that had spent 2 years rebuilding herself from the ruins he had left, demanded more than words. If what you say is true, she said carefully, then you will have proof, documentation, evidence of this conspiracy and the danger you claim to have faced. Oscar nodded immediately. I do. Letters, bank records, sworn statements. I can show you everything. Not just words, Florence. Solid proof that will help you understand why I made the choices I did. Then bring that proof to my father's house, Florence said. If there is truth in your story, he will know how to verify it. And if you are lying to me... She let the threat hang unfinished in the air between them. I am not lying, Oscar said firmly. I will bring everything to Lord Hart. Let him examine it as thoroughly as he wishes. I have nothing to hide from you anymore. Florence nodded slowly. Then we will see what truth looks like when laid bare. She turned to leave, but Oscar caught her hand gently. Florence, wait. She looked down at his hand on hers, then up at his face. The touch sent a jolt through her, a reminder of all the times they had held hands while walking, while talking, while simply existing in each other's presence. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, he said quietly, but I need you to know. What we had was real. My love for you was real. That has never changed, even when everything else did. Florence withdrew her hand carefully. Love is not enough, Oscar. Not without trust, not without honesty. You will have your chance to prove yourself, but words are no longer sufficient. She walked away with her head high, though her hand still tingled where he had touched it. Behind her, she could feel his gaze following her retreat. That evening, Florence sat in the drawing room with Helen, attempting to focus on her embroidery and failing miserably. You saw him again, Helen observed. It was not a question. I did. He wishes to present his evidence to father. To prove that his abandonment was not what it seemed, Helen set down her own needlework. And do you believe him? Florence was quiet for a long moment. I believe he believes what he is saying. Whether that makes it true remains to be seen. What will you do if his proof is convincing? I do not know, Florence admitted. Even if his reasons were valid, it does not change the fact that he hurt me deeply. It does not erase 2 years of pain and confusion. Helen reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. Perhaps not, but it might allow you to forgive. And forgiveness, I think, is the only way you will ever truly move forward, whether that is with him or without him. Florence looked at her younger sister with new appreciation. When did you become so wise? Helen smiled. I have been watching and learning from the strongest woman I know. That night, as Florence prepared for bed, she found herself standing at the window again, looking out at the darkened street below. Somewhere in London, Oscar was gathering his evidence, preparing to lay his soul bare before her father's scrutiny. And somewhere in her own heart, a small flame of hope flickered to life despite her best efforts to extinguish it. She thought of his hand on hers by the lake, the desperate sincerity in his eyes when he swore his love had been real. Part of her wanted so badly to believe him, to believe that what they had shared had been worth all the pain that followed. But belief required more than wanting. It required proof. It required truth laid bare and examined in the harsh light of day. Tomorrow, Oscar would bring his evidence. Tomorrow, she would see whether his explanations held substance or were merely pretty words designed to win back what he had carelessly discarded. Florence climbed into bed and pulled the covers close. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed of saddle straps cut clean through, of carriages careening off roads, of a man caught between love and fear, making impossible choices with irreversible consequences. She woke before dawn, her heart racing, knowing that whatever came next would change everything once more. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Lord Hart's study as Oscar Whitmore laid out his evidence on the mahogany desk. Florence stood near the fireplace, her father seated behind the desk, both watching as the Duke methodically presented his case. Oscar had arrived precisely at the appointed hour, carrying a leather portfolio that he now opened with steady hands. Despite his composure, Florence noticed the tension in his shoulders, the careful deliberation of each movement. "These are letters from my father to Leonard Hale," Oscar began, spreading several yellowed pages across the desk. "Written in the 6 months before his death. You will see father questioning discrepancies in the railway investment accounts, missing funds, falsified records, payments to phantom contractors." Lord Hart leaned forward, examining the documents through his reading spectacles. The handwriting was unmistakable. Florence recognized it from correspondence she had seen years ago. "These bank statements show the movement of funds," Oscar continued, adding more papers to the collection. "Large sums withdrawn from the railway accounts and deposited into private holdings controlled by Leonard Hale. My solicitor has verified their authenticity. And these?" Lord Hart indicated a separate stack of documents. "Witness statements," Oscar replied. "The stable master who discovered the damaged saddle girth after my father's accident. A former clerk in Leonard's office who kept copies of altered ledgers. A coachman who overheard Leonard discussing ways to silence inconvenient questions." Florence moved closer to the desk, drawn despite herself by the weight of evidence. She picked up one of the witness statements, scanning the careful script. "This stable master claims he was paid to remain silent about the saddle," she observed. "He was," Oscar confirmed, "but his conscience eventually overwhelmed his fear. He came to me 8 months ago with the truth." Lord Hart examined each document with methodical care, his expression growing increasingly grave. After nearly an hour of scrutiny, he sat back in his chair. "This is compelling evidence," the Earl said slowly. "If even half of these claims are true, Leonard Hale is guilty of fraud at minimum, and quite possibly of causing your father's death." "The authorities have been investigating for the past 6 months," Oscar said. "Leonard was arrested 3 weeks ago on charges of financial fraud. The evidence regarding my father's death is being reviewed separately, but the case is strong." Florence felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. The story was coherent, the documentation substantial. This was not the fabrication of a desperate man trying to win back a lost love. This was the truth, laid bare in ink and paper and sworn testimony. "Why did you not tell me any of this 2 years ago?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Oscar turned to face her fully. "Because the threats against me explicitly mentioned anyone I cared for. There was a note left in my study, warning that my loved ones would pay the price for my investigation. I was terrified, Florence. I thought if I pushed you away cruelly enough, if I made you hate me, then Leonard would see you as irrelevant to his schemes. So you chose to protect me by destroying me, Florence said. Yes, Oscar admitted, and it was the wrong choice. I understand that now. I should have trusted you with the truth, trusted you to make your own decisions about the risk. Instead, I took away your agency and caused you immeasurable pain. Lord Hart cleared his throat. Your Grace, I appreciate your honesty now, even if it comes belatedly. These documents do support your account of events. However, my daughter's well-being remains my primary concern. He looked at Florence. What would you have me tell him? Florence met her father's gaze, then Oscar's. The past 2 years had been a wilderness of confusion and hurt. But now, standing in this room with the truth finally before her, she felt something shift inside her chest. I need time, she said finally. Time to process what I have learned. Time to understand how I feel about choices made in fear rather than faith. Oscar nodded immediately. Of course, take all the time you need. But then he straightened, seeming to gather his courage for what came next. However, I would like to extend an invitation. Lord Hart, I would be honored if you and your daughters would consider spending a fortnight at Ravenshire Hall, not as a courtship, but as an opportunity for you to see who I truly am, not the Duke of London society, but the man who manages estates and cares for tenants and tries to honor his father's legacy. Lord Hart raised an eyebrow. That is an unusual request, Your Grace. I am aware, Oscar replied. But I believe Florence deserves to see the full truth of my life, not just the evidence in these documents. She deserves to see whether I am a man worthy of her consideration or merely a title with pretty words. Florence's breath caught. The boldness of the invitation surprised her, as did the vulnerability beneath it. He was offering to be examined, judged, observed in the most intimate aspects of his daily life. It would be properly chaperoned, of course, Oscar added quickly. Your entire household staff would accompany you. I simply ask for the opportunity to prove myself through actions rather than words. Lord Hart looked at Florence. The decision is yours, my dear. Florence considered the man standing before her. 2 years ago, he had made a choice born of fear that had shattered both their lives. Now he was offering transparency, vulnerability, proof not just of past actions, but of present character. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain the safe distance she had constructed. But another part, the part that had loved him once and perhaps never truly stopped, wanted to know the truth of who he had become. I will go, she said quietly. But understand, Oscar, this is not forgiveness. This is merely a willingness to see whether forgiveness might someday be possible. Relief flooded his features. That is all I ask. Thank you, Florence. After Oscar departed, Florence remained in the study with her father. You are certain about this? Lord Hart asked. No, Florence admitted. But I am certain that I need answers, and I cannot find them by hiding in London, pretending the past never happened. Her father nodded slowly. Then we shall go. But Florence, guard your heart carefully. Evidence of good reasons does not erase the consequences of past actions. I know, Father. Believe me, I know. That evening, Florence sat at her writing desk, composing a brief note to Jonathan Ward. She owed him honesty about her plans, about the fact that she was choosing to give Oscar this opportunity. Jonathan's reply arrived the next morning. It was gracious and kind, exactly what she had expected from him. Dear Miss Hart, I understand your need for clarity regarding the past. Please know that my regard for you remains unchanged, regardless of what you discover at Ravenshire Hall. I will be here should you need a friend, and I hope that whatever path you choose brings you peace and happiness. Your devoted friend, Jonathan Ward. Florence folded the letter carefully, touched by his steadfast decency. Jonathan represented safety, predictability, a life free from the storms that had characterized her relationship with Oscar. But as she began packing for the journey to Ravenshire Hall, she realized that perhaps she did not want a life free from storms. Perhaps she wanted a life that felt fully lived, with all its risks and rewards. Helen burst into her room, eyes bright with excitement. We are really going to the Duke's estate. Oh, Florence, this is like something from a novel. This is not a novel, Helen, Florence reminded her sister. This is real life with real consequences. but Helen was too young and too romantic to be dampened. "I think he truly loves you. Did you see how he looked at you when he presented his evidence? As though you were the only thing in the room that mattered." Florence turned away, not wanting Helen to see the hope flickering in her own eyes. "Love is not enough without trust." "Then perhaps you will find trust at Ravenshire Hall," Helen suggested. "Perhaps you will find everything you need." As their carriage rolled away from London 3 days later, Florence watched the city fade behind them. Ahead lay countryside, an estate she had never seen, and a man who claimed to have loved her enough to destroy them both. She did not know what she would find at Ravenshire Hall. But for the first time in 2 years, she was willing to try to find out. Before we continue, I want to thank those of you following Florence and Oscar's journey. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what happens next. And tell me, do you think Florence is making the right choice by giving Oscar this chance, or should she have chosen the safety of Jonathan's affection? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, and I love hearing from you. The carriage crested the final hill, and Florence caught her first glimpse of Ravenshire Hall. The estate sprawled across the valley below, its honey-colored stone glowing in the afternoon light. A silver lake stretched behind the main house, reflecting clouds and sky, while neat cottages dotted the surrounding fields. It was beautiful, yes, but what struck Florence most was the life visible everywhere. Workers in the fields, smoke rising from cottage chimneys, children playing near a village green in the distance. This was not a showpiece estate maintained for prestige. This was a living, breathing community. Helen pressed her face to the carriage window. "Oh, Florence, it is lovely. Look at those gardens. And is that a school building?" "It appears so," Lord Hart observed, his tone thoughtful. As their carriage rolled up the gravel drive, Oscar emerged from the main house, accompanied by an older woman in a housekeeper's black dress and a dignified gentleman Florence assumed to be the estate steward. Oscar helped Florence down from the carriage himself, his hand warm even through her glove. "Welcome to Ravenshire Hall," he said simply. The housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, curtsied respectfully. "We have prepared the east wing for your family, my lord. I hope you will find everything to your satisfaction." Over the following days, Florence discovered that Ravenshire Hall was nothing like she had expected. She had anticipated a duke's grand estate with all its formality and distance. Instead, she found a working home where the master knew every tenant by name. The morning after their arrival, Florence woke early and looked out her window to see Oscar already mounted on horseback, deep in conversation with a weathered man in work clothes. She watched as they rode together toward the fields, Oscar listening intently to whatever the man was explaining. "At breakfast," Mrs. Winters explained, "that would be Thomas Grant, one of our tenant farmers. His Grace rides out most mornings to check on the crops and hear about any concerns." "He does this regularly?" Lord Hart asked. "Every day, weather permitting," Mrs. Winters confirmed. "His Grace believes that an estate is only as strong as the people who work its land." Later that morning, Oscar invited them to tour the property. They visited the new school, where children of tenant farmers and village workers sat at neat wooden desks, learning their letters and numbers. A young teacher approached Oscar with obvious respect. "Your Grace, thank you again for the new books. The children are so eager to read them." Oscar smiled warmly. "Education is an investment in all our futures, Miss Thompson. Please let me know if you need anything else." As they walked toward the cottages, Helen whispered to Florence, "He is not at all what I expected." Florence said nothing, but she was thinking the same thing. The man she was seeing here bore little resemblance to the distant Duke of London society. This Oscar was engaged, present, genuinely concerned with the welfare of those who depended on him. They stopped at one cottage where an elderly woman sat in the doorway, mending clothes in the sunlight. She looked up as they approached, her weathered face breaking into a smile. "Your Grace, you are too good. The new roof has made all the difference. Not a drop of rain comes through now. I am glad to hear it, Mrs. Pemberton," Oscar replied, crouching down to speak with her at eye level rather than towering over her. "And how is your grandson? Is he settling into his apprenticeship in the village?" "Oh, very well indeed, sir. He speaks of nothing but what he is learning. You have given him such an opportunity." Florence watched this exchange with a strange tightness in her chest. The Oscar, she remembered, had been charming and attentive, yes, but this was different. This was a man who had taken his father's death and transformed his grief into purpose. That afternoon, Oscar showed them the estate's accounts in his study. Lord Hart examined the ledgers with his practiced eye, noting the careful investments in infrastructure, the fair wages paid to workers, the funds allocated for medical care and education. "You run this estate like a steward, not an overlord," Lord Hart observed. "That is what my father taught me," Oscar replied quietly. "A title means nothing if it is not backed by responsibility. These people depend on me. I will not fail them as others might have failed my father." Florence stood near the window, only half listening to the conversation. Her mind was occupied with reconciling the man before her with the one who had abandoned her 2 years ago. Could both versions be true? Could a man be both cowardly and courageous, both selfish and selfless? The next day, Oscar asked if Florence would like to ride with him. Helen and Lord Hart had plans to explore the gardens with Mrs. Winters, leaving Florence little excuse to refuse. They rode side by side across the estate, their horses moving at an easy pace. Oscar pointed out various landmarks, the old oak where his father had taught him to climb, the stream where he had fished as a boy, the hill where the entire valley could be seen at sunset. Finally, they reached a clearing overlooking the lake. Oscar dismounted and helped Florence down, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "This was my father's favorite place," he said quietly. "He would come here when he needed to think. After he died, I avoided it for months. It hurt too much. And now?" Florence asked. "Now I come here when I need to remember why I am fighting, why his death cannot be meaningless." They stood in silence, watching the sunlight dance across the water. Then Oscar turned to face her. "Florence, I know you said this visit was not forgiveness, but I need you to understand something. The man I was 2 years ago was paralyzed by fear. Fear of losing you the way I lost my father. Fear that loving you made you vulnerable. That fear turned me into someone I despise, someone who hurt the person he loved most." His voice grew rougher. "But living without you these past 2 years taught me something else, that a life lived in fear is not a life at all. That protecting someone by pushing them away is not protection, it is cowardice." Florence felt her carefully maintained walls beginning to crack. "What are you saying, Oscar?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I am saying that I have learned my lesson, that if you give me another chance, not now, but someday, I will never make decisions about your life without you again. I will trust you with the truth, always, even when that truth is dangerous or painful." "And if danger comes again?" Florence challenged. "If someone threatens you or me or both of us, what then?" "Then we face it together," Oscar said firmly. "As equals, as partners. I will not hide things from you out of misguided protection. You deserve better than that. You deserve a man who trusts your strength as much as he admires it." Florence felt something shift in her chest, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. She looked at his face, open, vulnerable, stripped of all pretense, and saw not the Duke, but simply the man. "I am not ready to forgive you yet," she said softly. "I know, but I am beginning to understand why you did what you did. And I am beginning to see who you have become." Oscar's breath caught. "That is more than I dared hope for." Florence reached up slowly, giving him time to move away if he wished. When he remained still, she touched his face gently, tracing the line of his jaw. His eyes closed at the contact, and she felt him tremble slightly beneath her fingertips. "You asked for time to prove yourself," she whispered. "You are doing so. Every day, in every small action I see here, you are showing me the man you are choosing to be." Oscar covered her hand with his own, pressing it against his cheek. "I will spend every remaining day of my life being worthy of you, if you will let me." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Florence withdrew her hand gently. "We should return. Father and Helen will wonder where we have gone." Oscar nodded, though his eyes held a mix of hope and longing that made Florence's heart race. As they rode back to the hall, Florence realized something had changed. She had come to Ravenshire expecting to find either proof of Oscar's unworthiness or confirmation that she could never trust him again. Instead, she was finding something far more complicated and far more dangerous. the possibility that love, once broken, might still be mended. The days at Ravenshaw Hall fell into a gentle rhythm that felt almost too perfect to be real. Mornings began with rides across the estate, afternoons were spent exploring the library or walking through the gardens, and evenings gathered everyone in the music room where Florence played piano and Helen accompanied her on violin. But beneath the surface of this idyllic routine, something else was building, a tension that made every glance between Florence and Oscar feel charged with unspoken possibility. It was in the small moments, the way his hand would linger when he helped her mount her horse, the way her breath would catch when he leaned close to point out something in a book, the way they would find themselves standing near each other in a crowded room, as though drawn by invisible threads. Lord Hart noticed, of course. One evening, as they dressed for dinner, he called Florence to his room. "You are softening toward him," he observed. "I can see it in how you look at each other." Florence could not deny it. "I am beginning to understand that his choices, while wrong, came from a place of genuine fear rather than callousness. Understanding is not the same as trust," her father reminded her gently. "I know, Papa, but perhaps trust must be rebuilt slowly, one day at a time." Her father studied her face. "Just promise me you will guard your heart carefully. I could not bear to see you hurt again." Florence kissed his weathered cheek. "I promise to be careful, but I also promise to be honest with myself about what I feel." That evening's dinner was particularly lively. The local vicar and his wife had been invited, along with the estate steward and his family. It was informal by London standards, but warmer and more genuine than any society dinner Florence had attended. After the meal, the party moved to the music room. Florence found herself at the piano, her fingers moving over the keys as she played a Chopin nocturne. The room fell quiet, everyone listening to the melancholy beauty of the piece. When she finished, she looked up to find Oscar standing near the piano, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "That was beautiful," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. "I had forgotten how you could make the instrument sing." "You used to turn pages for me," Florence replied, the memory surfacing unexpectedly. "In my father's music room, you claimed it was the only way to hear the music properly." A smile touched his lips. "I may have used that as an excuse to stand close to you." The admission hung in the air between them. Helen, ever perceptive, immediately suggested she play a duet with Florence, giving Oscar the perfect excuse to retreat. But he remained where he was, his presence a warm weight at Florence's shoulder. The guests departed as midnight approached. Lord Hart and Helen retired soon after, leaving Florence alone in the music room, reluctant to end the evening. She lit a single candle and returned to the piano, playing softly in the near darkness. She did not hear Oscar enter. Only when he spoke did she realize she was no longer alone. "I thought everyone had gone to bed," she said, her fingers stilling on the keys. "I could not sleep," he admitted, moving closer. "And I heard the music." He stood beside the piano, the candlelight casting shadows across his face. Florence found herself unable to look away from him. In this moment, with his guard down and his usual composure softened, he looked younger, more vulnerable. "Play something else," he requested softly. "Please." Florence began a Beethoven sonata, one she had practiced for weeks 2 years ago, hoping to perform it for Oscar before everything fell apart. Her fingers moved with certainty, muscle memory carrying her through the complex passages. When the final note faded, silence filled the room like water. Florence looked up to find Oscar watching her with an expression that stole her breath, raw longing mixed with something that looked almost like reverence. "I have missed this," he said, his voice rough. "Not just the music. You. Being near you. Watching the way you lose yourself in the melody. I have missed everything about you, Florence." She should have stood up, should have put distance between them, should have retreated to the safety of her bedroom. Instead, she remained seated, her heart pounding. "Oscar," she whispered. He moved closer, standing beside the piano bench. "May I sit?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He sat beside her close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell the subtle scent of sandalwood, and something uniquely him. "I know I have no right to ask for anything from you," he said quietly. "I know I destroyed what we had, and that rebuilding it may be impossible. But Florence, I need you to know these past days, having you here, Seeing you smile again, hearing you play, it has reminded me of everything I lost when I pushed you away." His hand moved to rest on the keys beside hers, not quite touching. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I am still in love with you, that I never stopped, that every day without you has been a form of purgatory I brought upon myself." Florence closed her eyes, feeling tears prick behind her lids. "You hurt me so deeply, Oscar, I know." His voice broke slightly. "And I will spend the rest of my life regretting that, whether you choose to forgive me or not." She opened her eyes and turned to look at him. In the candlelight she could see the truth written plainly on his face, the love, the regret, the desperate hope. "I am not that naive girl anymore," she said softly, "the one who believed love conquered everything. You taught me that love can also wound, can also destroy." "I did," he agreed, "and I hate myself for it. But perhaps," Florence continued, her voice barely audible, "perhaps that girl needed to grow up. Perhaps she needed to learn that real love is not just passion and pretty words. Real love is trust built slowly. It is choosing each other, even when that choice is difficult." Oscar's breath caught. "Are you saying—" "I am saying I am not ready to give you my heart again. Not yet. But I am willing to let you try to earn it back." The hope that flared in his eyes was almost painful to witness. He reached up slowly, telegraphing his intention, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she remained still, he cupped her face gently with one hand. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Florence's heart raced. This moment felt enormous, weighted with significance. A kiss would change everything, would acknowledge that something was still alive between them despite all that had happened. "Yes," she whispered. Oscar leaned in slowly, his lips meeting hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache. The kiss was soft at first, almost reverent, as though he were afraid she might shatter. But then Florence's hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm, and something shifted. The kiss deepened. Oscar's other hand moved to her waist, pulling her closer. Florence's fingers tangled in his hair, 2 years of longing and pain and unresolved feelings pouring into the contact. His lips moved against hers with increasing urgency, and she responded in kind, all her carefully maintained defenses crumbling. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Oscar rested his forehead against hers. "Florence," he breathed. "God, I have missed you." She could not speak, overwhelmed by sensation and emotion. Instead, she pulled him back to her, kissing him again with a hunger that surprised them both. His arms came fully around her, holding her close, and she felt safe and dangerous all at once. They remained like that for long minutes, kissing in the candlelit darkness, relearning the taste and feel of each other. When they finally separated again, Florence felt dizzy, her lips swollen and her heart racing. "I should go," she whispered, though she made no move to leave. "You should," Oscar agreed, but his arms tightened around her slightly. Finally, with effort, Florence stood. Oscar rose with her, his hand catching hers and bringing it to his lips in a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and unbearably intimate. "Good night, Florence." "Good night, Oscar." She made it to the door before she turned back. He was still standing by the piano, watching her with an expression that made her knees weak. "This does not mean I have forgiven you completely," she said. "I know," he replied, "but it means there is hope, and hope is more than I dared dream of." Florence fled to her room, her hand pressed to her lips where she could still feel the ghost of his kiss. She had promised herself she would be careful, that she would guard her heart. But standing in her darkened bedroom, her pulse still racing and her body still humming with awareness, she realized that some promises were impossible to keep. Because the truth was simpler and more terrifying than any caution. She was falling in love with Oscar Whitmore all over again. The letter arrived at breakfast 3 days later, shattering the peaceful sanctuary they had built at Ravenshaw Hall. Oscar read it twice, his expression growing darker with each pass, before handing it to Lord Hart without a word. Florence watched her father's face change as he scanned the contents. "What is it, Papa?" "Leonard Hale's trial begins next week," Lord Hart said grimly, "and the prosecution has requested that Oscar return to London immediately to provide testimony." "There is more," Oscar added quietly. "The Duchess of Somerton has agreed to testify on her uncle's behalf. She is claiming that my investigation is motivated by personal vendetta rather than justice. The journey back to London felt nothing like their departure. The carriage was heavy with tension, everyone aware that the fragile peace they had found at Ravenshire was about to be tested by the harsh scrutiny of society and the courts. London greeted them with grey skies and gossip. The newspapers had seized upon the scandal with relish, painting it as high drama, the Duke seeking justice, the Duchess defending family, and Florence caught in the middle as the mysterious woman whose presence signaled Oscar's true loyalties. The trial itself was a spectacle. The courthouse overflowed with spectators, eager to watch nobility tear each other apart in public. Florence sat with her father and Helen in the gallery, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as witness after witness was called. Leonard Hale was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, projecting an air of wounded dignity as he sat in the defendant's box. When questioned, he painted Oscar as an obsessed son unable to accept his father's accidental death, seeing conspiracy where there was only tragedy. Then Evelyn took the stand. The Duchess of Somerton was magnificent in black silk, every inch the grieving family member defending an innocent man. Her testimony was calculated and damning. "The Duke of Ravenshire has pursued this vendetta for 2 years," she said, her voice clear and steady. "He befriended me specifically to gain access to my family's private affairs. He is a man driven by grief to the point of irrationality, willing to destroy innocent lives to satisfy his need for someone to blame." Florence felt her stomach twist as she watched Oscar's jaw tighten. Evelyn's gaze flickered to Florence in the gallery, a small, triumphant smile playing at her lips. "And this young woman," Evelyn continued, gesturing toward Florence. "Miss Hart, is it not? She is merely the Duke's latest tool, I suspect, a pretty face to lend credibility to his claims, to make him seem like a man capable of genuine feeling rather than cold calculation." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her gaze steady on Evelyn, refusing to look away. When Oscar took the stand, he was composed but clearly strained. He presented his evidence methodically, the letters, the financial records, the witness statements. But Evelyn's testimony had planted seeds of doubt. The day after his testimony, a ball was held by Lord Pemberton, a calculated social test to see where society's loyalties would fall. Florence knew she and Oscar would both be expected to attend, their every interaction scrutinized for signs of scandal or impropriety. The ballroom felt hostile in a way Marlborough House never had. Conversation stopped as Florence entered. Eyes followed her every movement, and when Oscar arrived an hour later, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Evelyn was there, of course, resplendent in emerald green. She made certain to cross paths with Florence near the refreshment table. "Miss Hart, how brave of you to appear tonight," Evelyn said, her voice pitched to Carrie. "I do hope you understand what you are involving yourself in. The Duke is a complicated man with complicated motives." "I understand him better than you might think, Your Grace," Florence replied coolly. "Do you?" Evelyn's smile sharpened. "Because I have spent considerable time in his company this past year. I have seen sides of him that might surprise you. He is very good at showing people exactly what they wish to see." Before Florence could respond, Oscar appeared at her side. His presence was like a shield, solid and protective. "Duchess," he said formally, "if you will excuse us, Miss Hart has promised me this dance." He led Florence onto the floor without waiting for Evelyn's response. As they began to waltz, Florence could feel the weight of every eye in the room upon them. "She is trying to undermine you," Florence said quietly. "I know." Oscar's hand tightened at her waist. "I am sorry you have been dragged into this public spectacle." "I chose to be here," Florence reminded him. "I could have stayed away, could have protected myself from the gossip. But I chose you." Something fierce and tender flashed in his eyes. "I do not deserve you." "Perhaps not," Florence said with a small smile, "but you are trying to. That must count for something." The trial continued for 3 more days, each session more grueling than the last. The evidence against Leonard was strong, but his lawyers were skilled at casting doubt. By the time the jury retired to deliberate, no one was certain of the outcome. That evening, Florence received a note from Oscar asking if he might call upon her. She sent word back immediately, yes. He arrived as rain began to fall, the droplets hitting the windows of the Hart townhouse with increasing force. The butler showed him to the drawing room where Florence waited. Everyone else had retired for the evening, leaving them alone save for Propriety's open door. Oscar looked exhausted. There were shadows under his eyes, new lines of strain around his mouth. Florence's heart ached for him. "Whatever the verdict tomorrow," he said without preamble, "I need you to know that you have been my anchor through all of this. Seeing you in that courtroom, knowing you chose to be there despite the scandal it would cause, Florence, it gave me strength I did not know I had." She rose and moved toward him, drawn by the raw vulnerability in his voice. "You do not have to thank me for standing beside you." "But I do," he insisted, "because you had every reason to walk away, to choose safety over the chaos my life has become. Yet you are here." "Where else would I be?" Florence asked softly. Oscar closed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands framed her face as he kissed her with desperate intensity, and Florence responded with equal fervor. This was different from the kiss in the music room. This was need and fear, and the knowledge that nothing in life was certain. They broke apart, breathing hard. Oscar rested his forehead against hers, his hands sliding down to her shoulders, her arms pulling her close. "Come with me," he whispered against her hair. "Just for a moment, away from the eyes of servants and society. Let me hold you where no one is watching." Florence knew what he was asking, knew it was improper, potentially ruinous if discovered, but she also knew that life was fragile, that tomorrow might bring vindication or devastation, and that she needed this moment as much as he did. She took his hand and led him quietly through the house to the small library at the back, a room rarely used, far from the servants' quarters. She closed the door softly and turned to find Oscar watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The fireplace held dying embers, casting the room in warm shadow. Rain continued to beat against the windows, cocooning them in intimate isolation. Oscar pulled her close, his hands roaming her back as he kissed her deeply. Florence's fingers worked at the buttons of his waistcoat, needing to feel him closer, needing the barrier of fabric removed. His breath hitched as her hands found warm skin beneath his shirt. "Florence," he groaned against her mouth. "Are you certain?" "I have never been more certain of anything," she whispered back. They sank onto the sofa before the fireplace, hands exploring, breaths mingling, 2 years of separation dissolving in the heat between them. Oscar's lips traced down her neck as his fingers worked the fastenings of her dress. Florence arched into his touch, her own hands memorizing the planes of his chest, the strength in his shoulders. "I love you," he murmured against her skin. "God help me, I have never stopped loving you." "Show me," Florence breathed. "Show me what that means." And he did, with reverent hands and whispered promises, with kisses that started gentle and became urgent, with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears even as her body sang with sensation. They came together with the fire crackling beside them and the rain creating a symphony against the windows, choosing each other fully and completely. Afterwards, they lay tangled together on the sofa, Florence's head on Oscar's chest, listening to his heartbeat slowly return to normal. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he said quietly, "this moment is ours. No one can take it from us." Florence tilted her head to look at him. "Tomorrow you will be vindicated." "I believe that." "How can you be so certain? Because the truth matters, and the truth is on your side." Oscar kissed the top of her head, holding her tighter. "I never knew I could love someone as much as I love you. It terrifies me and completes me all at once." They remained there until the fire died completely, reluctant to break the spell. When they finally dressed and Florence led him back to the door, he caught her hand one more time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for believing in me when I could not believe in myself." Florence rose on her toes and kissed him softly. "Now go, get some rest. Tomorrow begins the rest of our lives." As she watched him disappear into the rainy London night, Florence touched her lips where his kiss still lingered, and felt hope bloom fierce and bright in her chest. The morning of the verdict dawned clear and bright, as though the storm had washed London clean. Florence dressed with particular care, choosing a deep blue gown that gave her courage. Today would determine not just Leonard Hale's fate, but the trajectory of all their futures. The courthouse was even more crowded than before, every seat filled with spectators eager to witness the conclusion of the scandal that had captivated society. Florence sat between her father and Helen, her hands folded calmly in her lap, despite the racing of her heart. Oscar sat at the prosecutor's table, his posture rigid with tension. When he glanced back and found Florence's eyes, she gave him a small nod of encouragement. The jury filed in, their faces unreadable. The foreman stood, a slip of paper trembling slightly in his hand. In the matter of financial fraud and conspiracy, we find the defendant, Leonard Hale, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Florence felt relief flood through her so powerfully that she had to grip the edge of the bench to steady herself. Helen squeezed her hand tightly. Regarding the additional charges related to the death of the late Duke of Ravenshire, the foreman continued, we find sufficient evidence to warrant further investigation and potential prosecution. Oscar's shoulders sagged slightly, as though a weight he had carried for years had finally been lifted. When he turned to look at Florence, she saw tears glistening in his eyes, not of sadness, but of catharsis. Outside the courthouse, journalists swarmed, shouting questions. Oscar pushed through the crowd to where Florence stood with her family. "May I call upon you this evening?" he asked quietly. "There is something I wish to discuss." "Of course," Florence replied, her heart already knowing what he would ask. When Oscar arrived that evening, Lord Hart received him formally in the study. After nearly 30 minutes, her father emerged and beckoned Florence to join them. Oscar stood near the window, looking nervous in a way she had never seen him before. "Your Grace has asked for my blessing to court you formally," Lord Hart said. "Given recent events and the character he has demonstrated, I have granted it. However, he wishes to speak with you privately." Her father withdrew, closing the door but leaving it slightly ajar for propriety. Oscar turned to face Florence fully. "I had planned to wait," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "to court you properly, to give you time to be absolutely certain. But this morning, standing in that courtroom, all I could think was that I have wasted too much time already. Life is too uncertain to defer happiness when it is within reach." He crossed the room and took both her hands in his. "Florence, I know I hurt you terribly, and that earning back your trust is a journey. But I must ask anyway because my heart will not be quiet until I do." He sank to one knee, and Florence felt tears prick her eyes. "Florence Hart, will you marry me? Will you take this flawed man who loves you more than life itself? I promise you honesty, always. I promise you partnership, not protection. I promise to trust your strength and your judgment. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life." From his pocket, he drew a velvet box and opened it to reveal a ring, a sapphire the color of midnight, surrounded by small diamonds that caught the lamplight. "This was my mother's ring," he said softly. "She was a woman of great strength and intelligence. My father always said she was his equal partner in all things. I can think of no better woman to wear it than you." Florence looked down at this man who had broken her heart and then spent months proving he could be worthy of it again. But before she could answer, she needed one final assurance. "If danger comes again," she said quietly, "if someone threatens you or me or our future together, what will you do?" Oscar met her eyes steadily. "I will tell you immediately. We will make decisions together. I will never again try to protect you by pushing you away. If threats come, we face them as partners, as equals. You have my word." Florence felt the last of her hesitation dissolve. "Then yes, Oscar. Yes, I will marry you." He surged to his feet, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. The kiss was deep and full of promise, tasting of tears and laughter, and 2 years of pain finally transformed into joy. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he whispered against her hair. "And you have made me believe in second chances," Florence replied. The engagement was announced in the Times the next morning, causing fresh gossip. But Florence did not care. Let them talk. She knew the truth of what they had overcome to reach this point. Jonathan Ward sent his congratulations along with a thoughtful gift, a first edition of poetry that he knew Florence loved. His note was gracious and kind, wishing her every happiness. The wedding was planned for 3 months hence. During that time, Oscar proved his promises true. When business matters arose, he discussed them with her fully. When he received a threatening letter from an associate of Leonard Hale's, he showed it to her immediately, rather than hiding it. The wedding took place at the chapel at Ravenshaw Hall on a golden September morning. It was not the grand society affair it might have been. Instead, they chose intimacy, family, close friends, and the tenants and workers of the estate who had come to mean so much to them both. Florence walked down the aisle on her father's arm, past pews filled with familiar faces. The children from the estate school scattered flower petals. Mrs. Winters dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, and at the altar, Oscar waited with his heart in his eyes. When the time came for vows, Oscar's voice was steady and sure. "I take you, Florence, to be my wife. I promise to honor you, to trust you, to stand beside you as an equal partner in all things. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life." Florence's own vows were just as firm. "I take you, Oscar, knowing both your flaws and your virtues. I promise to be honest with you, to trust you, to build a life with you based on truth and mutual respect. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life." When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Oscar's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all the kisses yet to come. The celebration afterward was joyous and genuine. Tenants danced with nobility, children ran through the gardens, food and wine flowed freely. It was not perfect by London society standards, but it was perfect for them, a celebration of community and second chances and love, hard won. As the sun set over Ravenshaw Hall, Oscar led Florence away from the festivities to the spot overlooking the lake, where they had first begun to rebuild their trust. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Florence replied honestly. "We have come so far from that first night at the ball when I could barely look at you without pain. And now I cannot imagine my life without you." She turned in his arms to face him. "You kept your promises, Oscar. Every single one of them." He kissed her softly. "And I will continue to keep them for the rest of our lives. This is only the beginning, Florence. The best is yet to come." As they stood together watching the stars emerge over their new home, Florence reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had not been easy. It had required forgiveness, courage, honesty, and trust, rebuilt brick by careful brick. But standing there in her husband's arms, Florence knew with absolute certainty that it had all been worth it. Every tear, every doubt, every painful step forward had led to this moment of complete happiness. And as Oscar murmured her name and drew her close for another kiss, Florence smiled, knowing that their story was just beginning. 5 years had transformed Ravenshaw Hall from a grand estate into a living testament to love and community. Florence stood at the nursery window, watching the morning sun paint the valley in shades of gold and amber, and marveled at how much life had changed since that fateful ball in London. Behind her, she heard the soft murmur of voices, Oscar speaking quietly to their daughter Eleanor, who at 4 years old already showed signs of her mother's curiosity and her father's determination. "Tell the story again, Papa," Eleanor insisted, her small voice bright with excitement. "About how you asked Mama to marry you." Oscar's laugh was warm and indulgent. "Again? We just told it yesterday." "But I like it," Eleanor protested, "especially the part where Mama said you had to promise to always tell the truth." Florence turned from the window to find Oscar sitting in the rocking chair with Eleanor on his lap, their infant son, Samuel, nestled in the cradle beside them. The sight never failed to make her heart swell. This man who had once been paralyzed by fear was now the most devoted father she had ever known. "Your mother is very wise," Oscar told Eleanor, winking at Florence. "She knew that promises mean nothing without actions to back them up. So I had to prove every day that I meant what I said." "And you did," Florence said softly, crossing to sit on the arm of the chair. "You proved it then, and you prove it still." Eleanor looked between her parents with the serious expression children sometimes wore when sensing the weight of adult emotions. "Mrs. Winters says you and Papa have the best love story in all of England." "Mrs. Winters is biased," Oscar replied, though his eyes were on Florence. But I would not argue with her. Their morning routine was interrupted by Helen's arrival, her face glowing with the contentment of her own happy marriage. Florence's sister had married Jonathan Ward 2 years prior, after a careful courtship that had convinced her of his steady character and genuine affection. "Am I interrupting?" Helen asked from the doorway. "Never," Florence assured her. "Come in. We were just telling Eleanor our story again." Helen smiled, settling into a chair nearby. "I remember when you came back from that first ball, Florence. You were so determined not to feel anything for him." "I was terrified," Florence admitted. "Terrified that I would fall for him again and be hurt all the worse for it. But you were brave enough to try anyway," Helen said. "That is what I learned from watching you. That love requires courage, not just feeling." Eleanor tugged on Oscar's sleeve. "Papa, can we go see the new lambs after breakfast?" "Of course, little one," Oscar replied, setting her gently on her feet. "Run and tell Cook we will be ready to eat shortly." Eleanor scampered off, her energy boundless. Helen excused herself to check on the breakfast preparations, leaving Oscar and Florence alone with their sleeping son. Oscar moved to stand behind Florence at the window, his arms encircling her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving me that second chance?" Florence leaned back against him. "Never. Not even in the difficult moments. You kept every promise you made to me, Oscar. When the railway investment faced challenges last year, you consulted me before making decisions. When that journalist tried to revive the scandal about your father's death, you showed me the articles before they were published, rather than trying to shield me from them." She turned in his arms to face him. "You have shown me every day what it means to be true partners. How could I regret that?" Oscar kissed her forehead tenderly. "I wake up every morning grateful that you saw past my mistakes to the man I was trying to become." After breakfast, the family walked through the village that had grown up around Ravenshaw Hall. The school Oscar and Florence had expanded now served over 60 children. The medical clinic they had funded provided care for all the estate families. The library they were building would open next month, a project that had Florence particularly excited. "Your Grace, Duchess," an elderly woman called out, waving from her cottage door. "Thank you again for the new roof. Not a drop came through during last week's storm." "We are happy to help, Mrs. Pemberton," Florence replied warmly. "How is your grandson's apprenticeship progressing?" "Wonderfully, ma'am. He speaks of nothing else. You have given him such opportunities." As they continued their walk, Eleanor holding her father's hand and chattering about the lambs she hoped to see, Florence reflected on how far they had come. This life they had built was nothing like the glittering but hollow existence of London society. It was real, grounded in community and mutual care. That evening, after Eleanor had been tucked into bed and Samuel settled in his cradle, Oscar and Florence climbed the hill overlooking the estate. It had become their tradition on their wedding anniversary, 5 years now, to return to this spot and renew their private vows. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The house below them glowed with warm light from a dozen windows. Smoke rose from the cottages scattered across the valley. It was a scene of peace and prosperity, hard-won and carefully tended. Oscar took both Florence's hands in his. "Do you remember what I promised you 5 years ago? That I would choose you every day?" "I remember," Florence said softly. "Today I choose you again. Tomorrow I will choose you again. Every day for the rest of my life, I will make that choice." Florence squeezed his hands. "And I choose you, Oscar. Not because you are perfect, heaven knows neither of us is, but because you are willing to grow, to change, to be honest, even when it is difficult." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. Then Florence spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Do you know what I have learned these past 5 years? That love is not just a feeling. It is a practice. It is the choice to trust when doubt whispers. It is the decision to forgive when hurt threatens to harden into bitterness. It is the commitment to rebuild when things break, rather than walking away." Oscar pulled her close, his arms strong and warm around her. "You have taught me that," he said quietly. "You have taught me that real love is not about grand gestures or perfect moments. It is about showing up, day after day, choosing each other over and over again." Florence tilted her face up to his. "Do you remember that night in London when you followed me to the terrace? when you asked for just a few minutes to explain. I was terrified you would refuse, Oscar admitted. I almost did. But something in your eyes made me pause. Some glimpse of the man you could be if you chose courage over fear. And here we are, Oscar murmured. 5 years and 2 children later, still choosing each other. Still choosing each other, Florence agreed. They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, sealing their private renewal of vows. When they finally turned to walk back to the house, hand in hand, Florence felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark days after Oscar first left. The path had not been easy. Trust broken could not be instantly mended. Hearts shattered took time to heal, but they had done the work, both of them, and the result was a love deeper and stronger than anything born from easy circumstances could ever be. As they reached the house, Oscar paused at the door. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what? For believing I could be better than my worst mistake, for giving me the chance to prove it, for building this life with me." Florence smiled, reaching up to touch his face tenderly. "Thank you for becoming the man worthy of that belief, for keeping every promise, for teaching our children that love means choosing each other every single day." They entered the house together, closing the door on the starlit night. Inside, their children slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to choose love over fear. But tonight, as Florence and Oscar climbed the stairs to their bedroom, hands intertwined, they carried with them the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it together. 2 years after breaking her heart, the Duke had found her again. And when he took that bold step, when he chose honesty over protection, partnership over control, courage over fear, he discovered something precious, that love, once broken and carefully mended, could become stronger at the broken places. That was the gift they gave each other every day, the choice to love, to trust, to build a life brick by careful brick. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Sometimes love asks us to forgive the unforgivable. Sometimes it demands we trust again when trust has been shattered. Florence and Oscar's story reminds us that real love is not found in perfection, but in the courage to be imperfect together. It is built not in grand moments, but in the quiet decision made each morning to choose the same person again, to build a life based on honesty and partnership rather than fear and control. Their journey teaches us that broken things, when mended with care and commitment, can become more beautiful than they were before. That second chances, earned through action and sustained through daily choice, can transform tragedy into triumph. What does true love mean to you? Is it the butterflies of first attraction, or the steady choice made year after year? If this story touched your heart, please leave a like. It helps others find these stories of hope and redemption. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another tale of love that overcomes the odds. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? I love knowing that these stories connect us across distances. Thank you for spending this time with Florence and Oscar. May you find your own courage to choose love every single day.